Hi, I'm Jackie Ferguson, Certified Diversity Executive, author of the Inclusive Language Handbook, podcast host for Diversity Beyond the Checkbox, and co-founder of the Diversity Movement. Today on the show, we're going to talk about why inclusive language is not about being politically correct, crossing the bridge between hiring quotas and recruiting top talent, and how to confront the hard questions about inclusion, including what privilege really is, and much more. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation about diversity and inclusion with Jackie Ferguson. She's our guest, and she is an award-winning content creator, entrepreneur, author, speaker, and podcast host. She spent the majority of her career across multiple facets of business, from startups to Fortune 500, and she is the co-founder and head of content and programming for the Diversity Movement. In part 1 of the show, we talked a lot about where the language of diversity and the language of all these things can get a little crazy, and how do we manage that? And we talked about the importance of curiosity in all of that. We talked about how to really understand why we need to address our own inbred biases that are blind to us, meaning you don't do them because you're an asshole. You do them because you never even thought about it, and really getting curious about that. We looked at even things like where we try to claim something we think is ours, but it's even not ours. And we get offended about things that are not really offensive. And like, maybe one of the things that we kind of touched on, and we've got to come back to a little bit, is what is the moment for you, whether you're black, white, green, purple, striped, what is the moment for you that you realize your own biases? Like, what was the moment when you realized those kinds of things? Because for instance, I grew up in an environment where every ethnic group was surrounded. You know, my mates were from India, from Pakistan, they were from Jamaica, they were Jewish, they were Christian, you know, they were black, white, Polish, European, we had everything around us because I grew up in a poor neighborhood where immigrants tended to live. And so we used racial slurs. Now, let me rephrase that. We use what would now be considered racial slurs that were not racial slurs at the time. And so the big question for me in this whole political correctness thing and the cancel culture thing, Jackie, that I want to bring up for you, it says you're an award-winning content creator. And, when the internet started, we went, oh, content is king. Content's not king. Content is ubiquitous. It's bloody everywhere, and it's nonsense, a lot of it. Right. Context is king. And it seems to me in a cancel culture, we've lost, and even in this inclusion language thing, we've lost the nuance of context. When I called my mates those names, none of them were offended. When they called me the names they called me, you tight-ass Jew, it wasn't offensive. It was a joke. There was a context. Now, I understand that same language can be used in a different context. I get that. But the broad strokes seem to have lost the context. Can we just start there to just sort of let people go, okay?
Yeah, context is important. And, the thing about it, Dove, I think it's less important for you in your small group that understands your friendship, understands the love and the respect and the trust. And what happens is you're really messaging the people around, the people who don't have that relationship that say, well, Dove says that word, so I can say that word, or Jackie says that word, so I can say that word. But you've not established that relationship of trust and love and respect. And so it comes across different. So that's one of the reasons to stay away from words like that, because of the outside perspective, the outside context, right? And not having the context and thinking that the permission is given to use that word because of, whatever the word is, because of someone else using it. And so we have to be careful, because we care about people in general, about using words like that because of other people, not because of that relationship that you have with that person that knows that that relationship is there, that trust, that love. And so that's why I recommend staying away from words like that. And, I really liked that you brought up political correctness, because that's one of the phrases that I get all the time, political correctness. Everyone has to be politically correct. Political correctness focuses on trying not to offend and avoid backlash personally, right? So that's superficial. Inclusive language, or being inclusive, seeks to respect and honor different identities and create environments that feel safe. So it's proactive, not reactive. And it's to pour into, to give to, not to make sure that you're not being taken from. And so the feeling is different. So political correctness, I'm not a fan of. I'm a fan of being proactive in, as you said earlier in the conversation, respecting and honoring people and respecting humans.
So I want to put a pin in that, because I want everybody to sort of grasp that, because it's important.
Yeah.
Because if I see a book that says Handbook for Inclusive Language, my assumption, again, my bias is, oh God, another politically correct book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. And I don't want to pick it up, and I don't want to read it. And that's why I want to put a pin in this, because I want people to grasp that what you're talking about is not political correctness. Political correctness is a reaction and a fear of reaction, versus what you're talking about, inclusive language, which is honoring and respecting, and also, fucking up and being accountable to that screw up, and saying, okay, how did I do better? But human beings are very bad at being accountable. We're very bad at owning our mistakes. We're always right. Yeah, I get it. We all go through that. But this inclusive language piece is a way for you to honor human beings, rather than going, oh, can I say this? Okay. And so it's really, I really want to point out that distinction that you've laid out there. And I think it's really important for people. And so when we come to those questions around a white paper, like we talked about in part one, would you say that's about inclusive language, or is that about political correctness?
I think, and that's a great question. I think it's about asking a question around, I think it's just shallow.
Right.
I think it seeks to touch the inclusive language. Is white paper inclusive? It's not about good or bad, which is the context that you don't want to use color. It's about what it's, the color paper that it's on, white printed paper. And so I think it's okay to ask the question, but I also think that people can quickly answer their own question. So then sometimes it's now asking the question to someone else. Are you really unsure? Or are you just trying to make a point, right? Sometimes people are trying to just say, oh, well, we can't say this and we can't say this. Not necessarily true. Just think about the context of it. And it's okay to ask someone that knows, like, can you say this? Or what do you recommend that I say instead? And you just have to dig into it a little bit.
So again, I want to come back deeply into the language piece, particularly with you, but I want to go into this this appropriation question, which also seems to be part of that, right? So a white guy who says to a black guy, "Yo, bro," and then the black guy's, I'm not saying this is real, I'm saying this is made up. Black guy is offended, right? Why is that offensive? So is that offensive? Well, and for me, this is my answer. It's not the truth. My answer is it offensive to that guy? the guy I just said yo bro to? Is it offensive as a generality? Is where all the confusion becomes. Because my black friends, like, so by the way, I say yo to people all the time. I always used to say, I've been through some of the worst neighborhoods in the world in my travels. And people say, well, how do you never get in trouble? And I said, because I have the black nod. Right?
What is that? Tell me.
Black nod is like I just walk through the street and I'm holding myself with confidence and I just look at the people in the eye and I go,
uh-huh.
Right? It's just like, I'm acknowledging you as a human being. And black people who have confidence seem to do that a lot more than white people. So it's a black nod. Is it a black nod? I don't know what it is. It's a nod, right? Is it offensive for me to say that? I don't know. So you know what I mean? It feels like, again, it's this idea that it's okay here, but it's not okay there. And in those, for me, the context is very simple because it's my context. It's not the context of the other. And I've never had a black person go, don't do that nod, it's a black nod, right? Or don't call it a black nod. I've never had that. So that's what I'm trying to have people get to is this piece around who is offended by it and who is not. And yes, you can ask yourself the questions. And yes, there are things that I will say to my close friends who are of other ethnicities or whatever it is, or gay friends. Sure. Right? You know, I've got a very good gay friend that I say, dude, you're gayer than Christmas. Now, I don't know if that's offensive to gay people, so I don't say it to gay people, but I say it to him because he'll then usually say something sexually inappropriate to me, and I'm laughing. Right?
Right. And that's your relationship. And again,
but that's the point you're trying to make, isn't it? That I'm trying to have people grasp is that it's the context of the relationship that we, including me, then generalize and say it's okay because I'm it's like me saying, well, I'm not racist because I'm married to a brown person. Well, of course I can make racist comments and be a brown person, I'm married to a brown person.
Yeah, I hear you. You know, I'd love to dig into the black nod, Dove, if we can.
Yeah, let's do that. That's a great example.
The reason why I like that is one of the things you said is I make eye contact, right? And if we think about the history of where that comes from, it's Black people acknowledging each other, right? I see you.
Yes.
I'm standing with you in solidarity, especially in times where there was a lot of, looking down on Black people. Yeah. And so for you, I have no problem with you making eye contact and acknowledging a person coming, towards you in a direction. Because the history of that and where that comes from is to have some kind of solidarity and love and respect for each other in situations where we feel uncomfortable, we have felt afraid, we have felt unsafe, and needing that. And so is that a Black nod? I don't know. Maybe, probably, right? I know what you mean.
Well, I see it culturally, but for me, it's a dignity nod.
Absolutely.
Right. And I'm acknowledging, so let's put it in. So it's modern, right? Fairly modern. And for me, here's the other version of it, because you'll see me do it at the end of the show when you and I finish, right? And we'll be off the air. And I'll do this. We did it last time to you, right? That is a Buddhist nod. Yeah. Right. And all it's saying is I honor the dignity of who you are as a human being. Yeah. Right. Absolutely. And so if I don't know you and I'm walking down the street, I don't go like this. I just give you the quote Black nod, whether you're white, black, or purple, doesn't matter. Right. And if I've had a conversation with you, I always go like this. Right. So am I ethnic? What brings us to our next subject? Am I ethnically appropriating? Well, I think that this is my opinion. I think ethnic appropriation is absolute, total, complete bullshit. Okay. Bullshit to the max, because you're now repressing creativity. There's nothing new, and we're all bringing things forward. And thank God, because if it wasn't for for Paul Simon and people like him who went to Africa and brought that beautiful music to the world. We'd all be without that. And thank goodness he did that. And he raised all the Black artists up, and not just him, but there was a bunch of them. Were they white guys? Yes. Did they use that in their music? Yes. Did they appropriate it? No, they said it's beautiful music. Let's bring it to the world. And in the process, brought forward King Sunny Ade, who's one of my favorite artists of all time, who's a Black artist. Most black people don't know who King Sunny Ade is. Like, every music.
King Sunny Ade.
Oh, yeah. Right. And all this other music that came from these other cultures. And it just is such a squeeze on creativity that this is where we're getting on these other lines. It's like, oh, now we're not honoring and respecting. We're now repressing and denying, and that's a different thing. Again, you can disagree.
Yeah. So from my perspective, Dove, and I don't disagree with that perspective per se. But just to add to it, what happened a lot of times is music would be taken by white people primarily that had access to those record contracts and executives. So what happens with appropriation in that form, and then I'll talk about some of the indigenous things that is also popular to discuss there.
Yeah.
With the music, it wasn't now, certainly some of the artists and producers would raise up those Black artists and say, one, I want to give you the platform. I want to pay you fairly, right? Which is another problem. But not paying them fairly, taking the music, not giving them credit, not giving them writing credit, etc. That's, I think, where the anger and frustration comes from
Absolutely.
The music side.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the issues. Now, for those producers and artists that give those platform and amplify those voices, I think that's amazing. We need that, because the power structure in a lot of the world, certainly in the United States, is with white people and still is, right?
Yep.
That's how our country was set up. And so we need the collaboration with white people to be able to raise to that next level a lot of times, because we don't have the keys to open some of those doors. We don't have the opportunity to, get in a room with someone that can move us to the next level. And we need advocates and partners for that. And so, I disagree with part of it, but what you're saying overall is absolutely spot on.
Well, I'm not an idiot, and I'm very aware that Elvis Presley is the stand-in for the Black movement of music, right? I'm clear that Eminem is the white introduction to rap music, right? He's a whitey. Okay, we can listen to this. But I'm old enough to remember the first official rap song, right? The first, although it wasn't the first, because Muhammad Ali was doing that before that as well. But I'm old enough to remember the Sugar Hill Gang and bands like that, and the song, hip hop, hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it became hip hop music. It's that lyric in the song. That's where the idea comes from. Because people said, "What's that hippie hoppy music?" Right. And now it's the number one music in the world. Right. And if you go to France, there's Black hip hop. There's hip hop, and it's it's white French people. And you go to China, there's Chinese. It's fantastic, great. But that part of that is about how it's been exposed. Now, should it have been exposed by Chuck Berry instead of Elvis Presley? Yeah, it should. Should it have been exposed by the Sugar Hill Gang as opposed to Eminem or whoever it might be? Yeah, of course. But let's not take away that it got exposed. Let's not take away that that's come to the surface. But I think we have a responsibility, if we being whoever we are, if we are at the front of a line, we always have to reach back.
Yeah,
We
Absolutely.
always have to reach back. And I don't care whether you're black, white, green, or purple. We have to reach back and pull somebody up and go, hold on a second. Hold on a second. Because I see this in my industry, right? There are leadership people who honestly are crap. Like their messages is old. It's command and control. It's nonsense. It's been dead 30 years, but they're so established, right? And who are they pulling up? They're pulling up other people like them. Right. And so people like me who are a little bit more outrageous and say things that are not so politically correct and say things that are calling some of these guys out and not being inclusive and not standing up for things that matter. We're going to, you're a bit too edgy there, Dov. Yeah. Am I really? Really? Am I? Well, you are, come on. I mean, so we've got to be willing to fight for those who don't have our privilege.
That's right.
But at the same time, it doesn't mean because you're white you've got privilege in the way that you think of it. I grew up extremely poor in a ghetto, what would be called a ghetto. I was told recently I'm not allowed to use that term anymore. For me, that's horseshit. I grew up in a ghetto. It was crime, poverty, violence, addiction, all that was there, and nobody had anything. That's what I grew up in. We were all mixed races. We all grew up together. And I remember going back to London on business a few years back, meeting with some people in London who were very Oxford, Cambridge, very well educated, been to all the right schools, who thought I was Canadian because my accent is not English. Right? And so they thought I was Canadian. They didn't know what it was. But immediately something came up, well, where were you born? And I mentioned that I was born in the UK. And they asked me where, and I told them, and I watched them switch off.
Yeah.
I watched them switch off because where I was born was rough. And they knew that. And so immediately, and by the way, I remember saying to my friend, this guy loved me. He was inviting me to private events at the Tower of London.
Yeah.
And suddenly blanked me because I was born in a certain part. That's the inherent bias that is not white or black or anything else. It's the understanding of, can I see this person beyond their skin, beyond where they were born, beyond their ethnicity? Can I reach back and bring somebody forward? And I feel like, in our previous conversation, that's your messaging. So talk to us about why the book, why the language book.
Absolutely. And Dov, before we even get there, can I touch on the privilege piece?
Yeah,
because
please.
I think that's such an important part. So with privilege, there are lots of privilege, and very often people are thinking about white privilege or just economic privilege, but there are privileges of having someone in your life that loves you, right? That's a privilege. So the thing about
Hallelujah.
Right, yes. Yeah. And the thing about privilege is there are privileges to having a certain skin or being a certain gender. But just like, and I love your example because you could have not said where you grew up and you were getting these advantages based on the assumption of who you were as a whole and full person without all of that information. Just like people make assumptions about me, about who I am as a whole and full person without having information, but I can't change my skin, right? So those biases come, and there's nothing I can do about that. I can't hide it, can't lie about it, right? That is what it is. And so there are privileges that are given to us based on our family, our experience, our race, our gender, our, ability, disability, right? And so there are lots of ways. People are very finite about what privilege is, and there are a lot of privileges. So I just wanted to say that part of the conversation. Again, really, we have to level set conversations with each other when we're talking about bias and privilege and inclusive language, which we'll get to. It's about learning and growing and respecting each other and understanding other experiences. And if we start there, and keep that front of mind, we can have better communication, better relationships with each other. And I think that's ultimately what my goal is. And so, yes, inclusive language, the Inclusive Language Handbook, we wrote it because there are ways that you can change your language so that people feel more respected and seen and included and safe. And you're going to make mistakes because we weren't taught inclusive language. And you're going to say something wrong and apologize. You're going to need to ask, how should I say that? If you're, if I said something and that's offensive, apologies. How should I say that? What's a better way? What's a more inclusive way to say that and learn? Again, back to staying curious, which is one of the reasons I love your podcast so much. That's so important. Stay curious, ask those questions and have those conversations and be uncomfortable, get comfortable being a little uncomfortable. Just like you said earlier, Dove, with, people sometimes look at you and say, you're challenging them, you're making them uncomfortable, and people don't like that. People don't like to be uncomfortable, but it's okay to get uncomfortable, to ask some tough questions, to not always have the answers, right? And all of that is okay. So we wrote the Inclusive Language Handbook, and I love it because it says, here are some guidelines to how to use your language to create those environments of safety and respect. And you know what? You're going to mess it up, which is why we created a handbook. There are reflection questions and ways for you to practice using the handbook. So we give you lots of cool stuff. So, what are some of the rules of just general language? What are the examples? What do we often say that we shouldn't? What should we say instead? And then really giving you an opportunity through exercises and reflection questions to practice, to try it. And then we help you with language when you mess it up, because you will mess it up. Oh, yeah. I still mess it up, and that's okay. That's why we call it a practice, because it's something that you do all the time. If any practice, whether it's, law or exercise or yoga, right? It's something that you continually do. You can continually try to get better at, that you continually mess up, fall, and that's okay. It's about, we're all human, and really embracing that humanity, which means that we're not perfect. We are going to mess it up. But again, staying curious and asking those questions, being open to new answers, is why we wrote the book, The Inclusive Language Handbook. And, it's fun to get and just write in the notes and take some of the little quizzes, like, okay, ladies and gentlemen, not as inclusive, can say everyone instead. And so there are things like that make it fun and relatable and accessible. And that was our goal, to make sure that in the conversations, in the work that I do, that we meet people where they are and help them along the way, and let them stumble and say that it's okay, and help them do better. And that's ultimately the goal for what we do at the diversity movement, and why we wrote the book.
And I think it's what you just said is really important, because I as I said, I know psychologically people don't like being wrong. I understand that, of course.
Right.
But really, if we're going to be better at inclusion, part of inclusion, if I was going to define inclusion, it would be, you have the right to be wrong. Right? You have the right to be wrong, meaning we are not going to crucify you for being wrong. Right? And because of that, you will learn when it's wrong or when it's incorrect, and how you can change it, as opposed to being afraid to be wrong, because we're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks, as opposed to, hey, Bob, what you just said there? Do you feel like that was right on? You and I talked about this in a conversation that was not recorded, but I'm very blessed in my life. I'm married to an amazing human being. It's the greatest gift of my life was she said yes when I asked her to marry me.
Love it.
And every day I'm grateful. And every day I tell her I'm grateful. But, people ask us, well, what's some of the tips? And we still teach a private relationship program.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things she said is, there are a couple of things, but one of them is this. And they go, what? I said, I've never asked my wife to change, and she's never asked me to change. That was our agreement coming in. But we will always challenge each other to be better.
Mm-hmm.
So change means I don't like it, you should change it. Be better is who you want to be. Let me remind you of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the key here in this conversation is, do you want to make somebody wrong and make them feel punished for it and tell them they've got to change? Or do you want to ask them, who do you want to be?
Mm-hmm.
Who's the best version of you? So listen, Bob, when you said that, is that really how you want to represent yourself? Is that true to you? Because I know you to be a really great guy, or you're a very loving woman, or you're a very kind individual, and is that really the kind of language you want to use? And they go, yeah, not really. Well, what could you use instead? I don't know. Well, get Jackie's book, read this book, have a look at this, ask a question. How about you reach out to that person you just said that to and say, what about that didn't work for you? Right? I think that I'm a decent human being, but, I put my foot in my mouth, maybe put both feet in my mouth, but how can I do better? That willingness, like I said, when my wife says, she'll say to me, we've been out somewhere and we'll come home and she'll say, can I talk to you about something? And I say, yeah. I go, I know where we're going. I already know, right? I know I've been a dick. I said something stupid, right? And I go, I know what it's about. And she go, what's it about? And I tell her, and she goes, yeah. And all she'll ever say is that how you want to be? You represent yourself in the world? And I go, no, it's not. And I'm really embarrassed by it and ashamed of it. And I don't want to do it. And she'll say, okay, you don't have to change. I'm not asking you to change. And I go, I know you're not. And she go, well, is there something you want to do? And I go, would you do me a favor? And she goes, yeah. I said, could we have a code? We have codes, right? Mm-hmm. And she goes, what's the code? And I go, the code is a lemon, right? I made a sour comment. It's a lemon. And she goes, okay, right. So we'll be out and I'll start to go down the road. And she goes, excuse me, does anybody have any lemons? And I, oh, okay. She's not embarrassed me. She's not humiliated me. She's not made me feel wrong, but she's awakened something within me that wants to do better. And I think that we can all do that as leaders around this whole language thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Dov, you're so right, because very often the language mistakes people make are not intentional.
No.
They're not seeking to offend, but they do unintentionally. And I think we as people need to share more and in general and say, what does that mean? Right? Because sometimes it's the way that I approach it is I always ask the question, and I encourage people to ask questions. What did you mean when you said that? Not like, oh, you're an idiot, right? Because if your wife were to say that, you'd have a reaction of defense.
Of course.
You wouldn't be open to the conversation, and everyone is the same. So what does that statement mean? And I've done this in practice with people who are using non-inclusive language or terms that they grew up with. But when you think about it, when you take that pause to really think about it, yeah, I shouldn't have said it like that. Or
and I probably would want to say it differently.
That's right.
If I gave myself the opportunity, but I'd probably go, I don't really want it to come across that way.
Absolutely.
Right. Jackie, we're at the end of part 2 of the show, and of course, I'm going to ask you to tell people where they can find out more about you. But I want you to give one simple, practical step that the person who is the most F you about this whole inclusive thing, right? They're like, I just can't bear it anymore.
Right.
What's the one tip you would give to them? Because I know that 99% of people are going to be like, this makes good sense.
Right.
I need to go out and get this book. I need to understand this at a better level. But there are going to be people, understandably, who are going to go, I'm just up to the eyeballs in this. I'm drowning in it. I've had enough and I can't really do anything else. I'm fed up. What's the one practical piece of guidance you can give them?
Yeah. I would say, I would ask the question, Dove, are you interested in making a better world through the way that you interact? Do you feel that people should be treated with respect and kindness and feel safe in their environments? If that answer is yes, then take some small steps, like changing a few words in your language at a time, or, asking people about themselves, having those conversations, starting dialogues that allow you to see the world in a different way. I'd say something that simple, and allow yourself to be a little uncomfortable, be a little unsure, and stay curious. I think that's what the advice that I'd give.
Thank you. That's wonderful advice. And I just want you to have people grasp, because I know you and I talked about it in the break. Why is inclusivity good for business?
Yeah. So there are some costs to your culture by not having inclusivity as part of that environment, because people don't, they feel bad. They feel offended. They feel like they're not being valued in that space. So there are a few studies of happy employees are 13% more productive. That's an Oxford study. That's like an hour a day of more productivity, which equals, right, more productivity with no more overhead is more profitability. So that's one, right? So if you're, just tweaking your language, making people feel more comfortable, right? We've all been offended in the workplace and spent the rest of the day like, that idiot, he didn't know what he was saying, right? And you're not really working. Now you're mad. You're not focused. 13% more productivity is a big deal. And then 71% of professionals prefer to work somewhere that demonstrates, not talks about, but demonstrates inclusive values. And so that matters with retention, that matters with your, hiring and recruiting practices. And you want the best and the brightest, and the best and the brightest require a more inclusive environment. And that doesn't mean they get it all right. It means that they're trying. It means that they're taking steps forward. So that's what I'd like to add there.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jackie. Again, please tell people where they can find out more about you, about your book, about your organization, so they can reach out to you.
Absolutely. You can find me at thediversitymovement.com, learn about what we do, get lots of amazing resources to help you on your journey. If you're interested in the book, you can go to theinclusivelanguagehandbook.com.
Wonderful. And again, we'll make sure that all those links are posted in the show notes, including social media and how you can reach out and connect through all the different platforms. Again, thank you, Jackie. It's been a pleasure and an honor to have you with us. Thanks for getting in the ring and being willing to go at it. And it's a pleasure and honor. Thank you. And for you, dear listener, remember, those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of the tribe. Business and political leaders committed to positively shaping the political and business landscapes know that they must tap into what drives human behavior. I'm Dov Barron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe. Unified, actualized meaning is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you can be more inclusive, and understanding that inclusivity is not just about race. It's not just about gender. It's about everybody. Let's be a little more human. Let's reach back. Let's bring people forward. That's what you can do, because that's who you actually are as a decent human being. Let's stop being defensive. Let's bring people closer. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into the deepest meaning to reach your next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact.